In today's Adobe Illustrator tutorial, you will learn how to create Memphis design using 3D effects. First, you will see how to create different patterns using Zig Zag effect and clipping mask. Then we'll see how to create 3D shapes using Extrude Bevel and Revolve from 3D effects, how to apply your patterns to these shapes, and also we'll learn how to add stunning depth to your artwork using blending modes and gradients. You're watching TNT tutorials. Let's move on and create a new document. Select Print, A4, Horizontal Orientation. In Advanced Options, select RGB and click on Create. You can download this image reference and patterns reference by the link in the video description. Just create layers for them, then click on File, Place, and find path to downloaded references. I also recommend you to download swatches. After you downloaded them, click here on Swatches, select all these colors, delete them like so, then click here on Swatch Libraries menu, select Other Library and find path to downloaded swatches. You will see this window. Just click on this folder. All these colors will appear in our swatches panel. After this, close this window. Let's create new layer and rename it to Background. Now let's select Stroke, click here on None, select Fill. Let's pick this dark color, M for Rectangle tool, and draw a rectangle like this. I will bring this layer down and lock it. Just click here. Now let's create another layer and rename it to Patterns. First of all, let's pick this color, M for Rectangle tool. Let's just draw a base layer like this. V for Selection tool, deselect this rectangle. Now you can press this button on your keyboard to pick Line Segment tool. Also, you can simply find it here. Let's just draw a line like this. Hold Shift to build straight line. Let's click here on Color, select Stroke, and pick white color. Properties, play with stroke width, then Effect, Distort and Transform, Zig Zag, Preview. Now you have two options, to make zigzag smooth or with corners. When you will create your own patterns, you can create two types of patterns, one with smooth line and another with corners. Play with these values. Let's select corner, something like this. Also, you don't need to worry about these parts. We will hide them later. You don't need to cut them. Now click OK. I will decrease stroke weight. I think I will decrease it to 1 and 5. If you want to change your effect, you can find it here in Properties. Also, you can click on Appearance. We will use this window today very often. If you don't have Appearance in your panel, just click here on Window and pick Appearance. If it will appear somewhere here, just drag it like so. Right here you can see all effects that you applied to your shape. Right now let's click on Zig Zag and change some values, like this. Let's click OK, V for Selection tool. If you want to center this zigzag line, you can move it like so, and Illustrator will help you to center it. Also, you can simply select these two objects, Properties, and align them. Just make sure that you're aligning not to Artboard, but to Selection. Sometimes aligning to Artboard will work for you very well, but sometimes not. You simply need to work more to see in which cases use this one or this one. Also, you can see that this line is straight, and this zigzag is only applied effect. If you want to have points on corners to be able to manipulate this zigzag, just click here on Object, Expand Appearance. And now what you can see is that you have points, but this line is not zigzag effect anymore. Let's click here on Appearance, and you can see that there's no zigzag effect. Now you can pick any points you want and manipulate them. You can also pick a few points and move them like this. So if you will play with these points, you can also get some interesting design and create pattern with it, like this. It's up to you to experiment, so just take your time and try this out. I'll press Ctrl Z to undo, and I will duplicate this line like so. Hold Alt plus Shift and drag it down. Then press Ctrl plus D as many times as you need. I will select them all and move them up. To hide all these parts, pick Base Layer, Ctrl C, Ctrl F. We just made copy of this rectangle. Right click on this copy, Arrange, bring to front. Now you can see that this layer is on top. Select all these layers, right click, make clipping mask. To edit objects that are in clipping mask, just double click on this clipping mask and move them, or change any way you want. To exit this mode, you can click on this arrow, or you can simply double click somewhere on the workspace. To know more about clipping masks, you can watch such tutorials as 3 types of masking or 9 ways to add texture. This is advanced tutorials where you can get great understanding on how masking in Adobe Illustrator works. Let's continue with this one. I think I will simply duplicate this base rectangle to create another pattern. To do this, let's select it here, Ctrl C, and if you will press Ctrl F, you will simply place it inside of this clip group. We don't want this, let's press Ctrl Z, let's press Ctrl Shift V. And now as you can see, we placed it not inside clip group, but as separate layer. So let's move it like so. Apply this color. Make sure that you're applying color not to stroke, but to fill. If you accidentally applied color to stroke, just click here on None. Also, let's rename this pattern to 1 and lock it for now. Let's click here on Color and pick White color. L for Ellipse tool. Let's draw ellipse like so. Also keep in mind that I'm showing you basic tips on how to create patterns, and with these tips you can create as many different patterns as you want. Use different shapes and different combinations. For example, I've created ellipse. You can use triangle, rectangle, or anything like that. If you want to use triangle, for example, pick Star tool, click somewhere on the workspace, select 3 points, and click OK. Then rotate it like so, and you have your triangle. Let's duplicate it. Then press Ctrl plus D as many times as you need. Select all these ellipses, and as you can see, each time that we will manipulate our pattern, we will pick unneeded layer, and this unneeded layer is this rectangle. We will always need to hold Shift and deselect this rectangle. To avoid it, in these cases just simply select needed layer and press Ctrl plus 2 to quickly lock it. Then when you will need it, you'll be able to find it and unlock it in this panel. Also, if you can't find needed layer, for example, we have a lot of layers, with this layer selected, we're clicking on Locate Object, and Illustrator quickly finds it for us. So let's press Ctrl plus 2. Let's select all these ellipses and duplicate them like so. Now let's delete following ellipses. Select these ones, Ctrl G to group. The same here, Ctrl plus G. Now select them both, hold Alt, plus Shift. Now look to the right. As you can see, Illustrator helps us to align these layers and to move them to the same distance as we have between first 2 layers. So let's just release Shift, Alt, and left mouse button. Now press Ctrl plus D as many times as you need. I will select all these ellipses and move them just a bit. Now let's unlock this layer. In this case, we don't need to make clipping mask, because we don't have anything to hide, so let's just select all these objects and press Ctrl plus G to group them. Let's rename this layer also. If you need to quickly duplicate object from group or from clip group, A for direct selection tool, pick needed object, Ctrl C, Ctrl Shift V, and you have a copy. Let's lock layer number 2, pick white color for this one, press this button for line segment 2, swatches, for fill select none, and for stroke let's pick this color. Now build line like this, let's increase stroke weight, and duplicate this line as we already did. Also keep in mind, after you will change distance, and you will press Ctrl plus D to duplicate this object, as we did, this won't work for you, because Ctrl plus D is a combination that repeats latest movements. So if you play it with distance, just remember this distance, delete object, make copy again, and then press Ctrl plus D. In this case we need clipping mask, so let's pick this base object, Ctrl C, Ctrl Shift V, select all layers, right click, make clipping mask. Now let's rename this layer to 3, unlock these two layers, let's delete this pattern reference, we don't need it anymore. And now it's time to save these patterns properly to be able to use them as textures for future 3D shapes. To do this, click here on Symbols. If you don't have this panel here, Window, Symbols, it might appear somewhere here. Drag it like so. Then select these symbols. Don't be afraid to delete them. Like this. Then select needed pattern and click here to create new symbol. Let's rename this to 1. Click OK. Now it's time for second pattern, number 2, and number 3. As you have these symbols here, and you know that you won't experiment with these patterns, you can simply delete them. Don't be afraid to do this, you have them as symbols, and they won't be deleted from symbols if you will delete them from layers. So it's up to you, leave them or delete them. I personally recommend you to leave them because later you might want to change something and then simply save it as number 4 or 5 and so on. You can just make this layer invisible. To avoid any distraction, I will delete this layer and I will create new layer and rename it to number 1. This will be our first 3D shape. Let's pick this color, M for rectangle tool, let's draw a rectangle like this, V for selection tool, Ctrl C, Ctrl F, rotate this rectangle like this, let's change proportions here, select them both, Properties, Pathfinder, Unite. Now what you don't want is this unnecessary point. To see all points of your object, press A for direct selection tool. So as we don't need this point, P for pen tool, and delete it. If you would not delete this point, later, when you will apply texture, this will cause some problems. So just keep in mind, if you have some problems, check if you have some unnecessary points. If you have, delete them. Now with this object selected, Effect, 3D, Extrude and Bevel, Preview, and what I like to do is select Front. If I won't be happy with position of this object, I will simply select Front again. So now let's apply rotation of this object according to reference, like this. Let's click on More Options. You have lightning source here. Move it as you want. You can add even more lightning sources. Play with them. You can also play with all these settings. When you have such simple object as this, there's no difference if you have diffuse shading or plastic shading. Also you can choose no shading and wireframe. As we picked wireframe, you can see that this side is separated. Basically we have two rectangles here. We don't want this, so let's click on Cancel, P for pen tool, and let's delete this unnecessary point. Today we won't apply texture to back side, But when you will create your own design, you should always keep in mind that you don't need unnecessary points in your objects. So Effect, 3D, Extrude and Bevel, Front, Preview. Let's apply needed rotation. I also don't recommend you to drag this shape like this, because you don't have enough control on your object. Just use this method. Of course, it's up to you, it's just my recommendation. So I will stop on this result. Let's create another shapes. We will create these two shapes now, and after this we will apply textures, blending modes and shadows. So for this one, let's click OK. Let's move it somewhere here. Create new layer, rename it, L for ellipse tool. Let's draw ellipse like this. Ctrl C, Ctrl F, V for selection tool. Make this ellipse smaller, like so. Now select them both. Shift plus M for shape builder. Hold Alt and click on this part. With Shift plus M, you're picking shape builder tool. It's over here. If you want to quickly apply settings from previous object with the same lightning sources and so on, just open this layer group. Open this layer group also. As you can see, this dot is filled. Just hold Alt, drag it to needed shape, and release it. The same rotation and all other effects applied to this object. Let's pick it. Properties. You can always change it here, or click on Appearance. Click here on Applied Effect, Preview, and change it like this. I will rotate it like so, and I will change Extrude Depth. I think I will change it to 25. Let's try this out. And when you have rounded shapes, you can see that you have some rough transitions here. If you want to make them smooth, play with blending steps. You can increase them, and as you can see, these transitions here will become much smoother. So it depends on situation. Sometimes you need something like this, and sometimes you need some smooth transitions. I will leave this result, and I will place it like so. Now let's move this one here also. And to create this shape, we will use Revolve. Let's simply create Rectangle, Effect, 3D, Revolve, Preview. And this is not all with Revolve. To know more about this 3D feature, you should watch tutorial 3D shapes with textures, where I show you how to create interesting design with 3D effects, have a lot of fun, and get amazing results. I definitely recommend you to watch the tutorial, especially if you're a beginner. For today I will choose Diffuse Shading, change blending steps. If you created some object in wrong layer, just create new layer, rename it if you want to, and now watch this. As you can see, this object is selected, and in Layers panel, we choose this layer. So with this combination, right-click on this object, Arrange, Send to current layer, and we have it here. Also, you can simply drag needed object to needed layer. After you applied 3D effect, you can select object and change proportions. A for direct selection tool, let's change proportions here, like this. You can even add more points. And play with shape just as you want. You can do the same with any object that you will create. So I will press Ctrl Z. What you should also know is that when you will change size of your shape, 3D effect will be changed. You can see these changes. So after you applied size, click on Applied Effect again, Preview, and simply change Extrude Depth. Let's enter 30 here. You might want to enter less value. I'll press Ctrl Z. Let's change some lightning for this object. To add more volume here, let's create another lightning source and click here on Move Selected Light to Back of Object. Move it like so. As you can see, you can get some great results with lightning effects. Now let's add textures and let's begin with this object. Let's click here on Applied Effect, Preview, Map Art. Here you can see surfaces, 8 surfaces in this object. If we would not delete unnecessary points here and here, we would have much more unnecessary surfaces. And you don't need this when you're applying texture. When you're switching between surfaces, it highlights which surface did you choose. Right now we need this one. Let's click here on Symbol and try our patterns. You can click Scale to Fit and then increase size or decrease size of your pattern. Hold Shift to scale your pattern proportionally. You can move it all around, try how it looks, try different sizes. If you don't like how this pattern looks, just click here on Clear. Or if you applied pattern to all these sides, click here on Clear All. After this, try any other pattern. You can also simply apply new pattern. For example, you applied this one, and you want another pattern, just click here on New Pattern. Let's make this one smaller proportionally, with Hold Shift. Try to move it, scale it. I will stop on this result. As you might notice, there is no shadows on this texture, and to have shadows that you applied to this object, click here to Shade Artwork. Now let's click OK, and if you will change lightnings here, you can see that they are applied to your texture. But if you will turn off shading, you can see that there's no shadows on your pattern. So it always depends on situation and purpose. What I want to tell you about shading is that I always try to avoid shading that you can apply with 3D effects. I like to apply shading with blending modes and gradients. I will show you how to do this after we will apply textures to these objects, and then you will be able to choose, because sometimes you might be happy with this result. If you need to quickly create some 3D objects with textures, you don't have much time, you can simply create it and apply textures. Also, what I want to tell you right now is that sometimes when you will click on Map Art, this window might get bigger and bigger. So what you want to do in this case, you can scroll down like this, click on Cancel, let's click OK here, and simply click on this Applied Effect again, then Preview, Map Art, and everything will work for you just fine. So just keep in mind that sometimes this window gets bigger and you're not able to make it smaller, like I do it right now. So just quit this panel and enter it again. Let's move this one here for now. Let's click here on Applied Effect, Preview, Map Art. Let's pick this texture. Let's play with it, make it smaller like so. Shade Artwork and click OK. After you applied texture, you're still able to change rotation of your object. So just experiment and try different combinations. Let's click OK for this one also. Let's apply texture for this one. Preview, Map Art, and let's pick this texture. This texture is too big here. Just hold Shift and drag any side like this. It will be changed proportionally. So you don't need to find some corners, just drag any of these sides. Let's clear it from here and let's apply it here. Let's do basically the same. Try how it fits. Make it smaller, bigger, and move it. Shade Artwork and click OK. Now let's also rotate this object according to reference, like so. Click OK. And now if you want to make some really great design, not just simple quick 3D shapes, here is what you should do. First of all, if you are not sure about what you're going to do next, if you're going to experiment, you should save this document as document number 1. then experiment and save file as number 2. You can rename file number 1 to backup. I think you get the main idea. Or you can simply duplicate all these layers, like so, make these ones invisible, and work with these ones. This way is not so good because your computer might run slower because you will have too many 3D shapes in your artwork, so it's better to simply have backup file and work in another file that you can change and freely experiment with it and not be afraid that you will lose something. So after you've created backup, let's select this one for example. So after you've created backup, let's work in the way that I like the most, because this way allows you to be creative and control your design very well. So let's select this object for example, apply the effect, let's uncheck Shade Artwork, click OK. This is a very important step, don't miss it. Also, it's better to click on No Shading, click OK. After this, Object, Expand Appearance. Now this is not 3D object anymore, and first thing that you will need to do after you will expand 3D object, I recommend you to do it every time with any 3D object. First of all, just right click on it and select Ungroup. It will be still grouped, but while you pressed Ungroup, let's press Ctrl Z, because if you won't press Ungroup, you will have group inside of group, and this might cause some errors. So just remember this important step. First of all, ungroup, and you will simply have one group inside of your layer group. This is proper way of working. So now A for Direct Selection tool, let's pick this object, swatches, let's apply this color. Now let's pick this object. As you can see, this is Clip Group. Let's just select it right here in Layers panel, right-click on it and select Isolate Selected Clip and Mask. M for Rectangle tool, draw rectangle like this, gradient, linear gradient. Later you will be able to easily manipulate with all that stuff that I will show you right now. For this shape, let's move this marker here, hold Alt, duplicate this marker here, G for Gradient tool. Let's just draw it like so. It depends on where you want to locate shadow. You can rotate gradient like so. If you can't rotate it, that means that you're trying to rotate it from wrong side. You can rotate it from side when you see this rectangle, not ellipse. So don't worry about this step, you'll be able to adjust shadow anytime. That's why I work this way. You can change anything anytime and it's very professional. You're in full control of design that you are creating. Now V for Selection tool, Properties, Opacity, and for this object, let's use Multiply. You can play with opacity, and after you played with opacity, you can see how this shadow applies to your object better, and you can play with it like so. G for Gradient tool, and play with sliders. If you don't want this color to be too dark, just double click on this marker and pick some brighter color. V for Selection tool, Layers. Let's press Ctrl C, Ctrl F. We duplicated this shadow, and now let's make some combination of blending modes. Click on Opacity. Let's change opacity to 100% for now. Let's try Overlay here. I think it looks very nice. You can play with opacity, layers. Now let's see what this overlay blending mode gives us. Let's make it invisible and visible again. You can see some great results. Let's exit this mode. What I want to tell you now is that you don't need to enter this isolation mode each time you need to change something. You can simply open this clip group here, pick needed layers, and work with them. For example, you need to change something in this layer. Just select it here, G for Gradient tool, and change shadow. Also sometimes you might see that you have some group here, but this is not group. So just select needed object with direct selection tool, right click on it, ungroup. As you can see, nothing changed because that was only one object, and now you can simply duplicate it. Gradients, linear gradient for example. Let's delete this marker, move this one like so, G for gradient tool, apply direction like this for example, opacity, and play with gradient tool. For this design I've decided not to apply shadows to this part. Let's continue with other objects. Let's move this one somewhere here, lock it, with this object selected, object, expand appearance, right click, ungroup. What problems can you have when you're working with such shapes is that let's open this clip group for example. Let's pick this object, A for direct selection tool, and you can see that you have too many unnecessary points. You really don't need them at all. We have so many points here because we had shadow on this 3D object. Before we expanded this shape, we selected no shading, but when we expanded this 3D shape, we left diffuse shading for it, and that's why we have too many objects here. When you know that you can't undo to the moment when you expanded this object, you don't need to worry, because as you can see you have clipping path here. Let's select it, and in this clipping path we have correct amount of points. There is no unnecessary points. So what you want to do here is to double click on this object to enter isolation mode, double click on this clip group, M for rectangle tool, let's draw a rectangle like this, swatches, apply this color, and delete this layer, because we don't need it. We will create our own shadow. Exit this isolation mode, and now you don't have unnecessary points, you have this clipping path, an object inside of this clipping path. It might only seem complicated, but just follow this tutorial step by step after you will watch it, repeat some moments if you will think that you missed something, and everything will be understandable for you, because everything simply needs practice. Now let's do the same with this object. If you don't want to double click to enter isolation mode, right click on needed object and select isolate selected clipping mask. Now the same here. Let's create rectangle and delete this part. Double click somewhere to exit isolation mode. Now you have clean shape without any unnecessary points, any unnecessary lines, and the shape is ready for applying shadows and blending modes. Let's start with this clip group. Let's duplicate this rectangle, select it, gradient, linear gradient. Let's drag this marker here, duplicate this one here, properties, opacity. Let's select color burn here. For next objects, I will use combination of color burn and overlay. This is great combination for this design. So let me show you how it works. You can play with opacity, but I will leave it at 100%. G for gradient tool. Remember that you can change direction of gradient tool anytime and change its proportions like so. Let's pick brighter color here, just a little bit. Now let's duplicate this layer, properties, opacity, and apply overlay. Let's make these transitions here softer. V for selection tool. Now you can do the same with this part, but also you can simply pick these two objects, Ctrl C, select this clip group, right click, isolate selected clipping mask, and press Ctrl F. Sometimes it will work for you, and sometimes not. I just showed you combination of how you can quickly copy some objects from one clip group to another. Let's double click somewhere to exit this isolation mode. Let's make this one invisible. This is overlay. This is color burn. G for gradient tool. Let's play with these sliders, like so. Now, instead of applying the same settings of gradient to this object, let's just simply delete it, duplicate this one, Properties, Opacity, and apply Overlay. G for Gradient tool, and now you can make softer transitions in these parts, like this. It depends on design, I will leave it like so. And now let's apply shadow to this part, where we have pattern. Let's open this group. You can see clip group again. So let's just select it here. Right click, isolate selected clip and mask again. Now M for rectangle tool. Draw rectangle. Properties, opacity, color burn. G for gradient tool. And play with direction. Let's delete this marker. You can also click here to reverse gradient. I think this black color is too dark. Let's make it brighter, like so. Let's also exit isolation mode to see what results we have. Let's pick this rectangle with color burn blending mode. Let's duplicate it and apply overlay. G for gradient tool. And play with sliders like so. I think we can make this color here darker. You can always make these layers invisible. Make them visible one by one to check if you get needed results, if you like everything. If not, try to change blending mode for any of them. Basically, it's enough to have two blending modes in combination. You don't need to make combination of 3 or 4 blending modes. Sometimes you need, sometimes not. So just experiment and take your time. Now let's move this object to side and work with this one. Properties, Applied Effect, Preview, No Shading, click OK, Object, Expand Appearance, A for Direct Selection tool, let's pick this part, Swatches, apply this color. For this part, let's apply this color, and for this part, let's apply darker color. You might be happy with this result, so that means that you don't need to always apply gradients and shadows. Sometimes you just want to make some minimalistic design, and this is the way to create one. Now let's first of all ungroup this object, just as we did with all others. Open this layer group, select this clip group, right-click, isolate selected clip and mask, M for rectangle tool, draw rectangle, gradient, linear gradient, G for gradient tool, change direction, V for selection tool, properties, opacity, color burn. After this, play with markers until you will get needed results. Ctrl C, Ctrl F, properties, opacity, overlay, and play with these markers. I think this part is too dark. Let's select this rectangle, double click on this marker, and let's leave it like so. Now, as you can see, we can ungroup each of these parts because they are not groups, they're just an objects. So let's pick this one with direct selection tool, ungroup, the same here and here. Now let's isolate this object. We double clicked on it, pick this part. For this one, you don't need to create rectangle, you don't need to apply clip in mask, just press Ctrl C, Ctrl F, apply gradient, apply direction. Don't forget to change color here, properties, opacity, color burn, G for gradient tool, Ctrl C, Ctrl F, opacity, overlay, G for gradient tool again, play with sliders. And for this design, I will leave these two parts without gradients and without shadows. So let's exit isolation mode. From this tutorial you already know how to create these zigzag lines, and to create these objects you can simply create rectangles like this. Ctrl+C, Ctrl+F, select them both, Properties, Unite, and do exactly the same as we did with these objects. Change extrude depth. If you will decide to leave these lightning sources and to leave this object as 3D shape, there's nothing wrong with it. There's just another way of working. Click OK, and after this you're able to rotate this object like so, and 3D effect will be applied accordingly. If you see this result, that means that you need to simply change lightning sources. Preview. Play with light like this. In this design I have shadows here. They're adding even more depth, and that's why in the beginning of this tutorial I told you that you will need to have appearance in your panel. Because when you will experiment with these objects, appearance panel will allow you to easily manipulate with all effects that you will apply to your shape. Now we don't have any effects here, but when you're experimenting with your design, you might have a lot of effects. You can turn them off, you can delete them, and change them. So for this one, let's apply drop shadow. Let's click here, stylize, drop shadow, preview, and play with all these settings, like so, with blurring, with opacity, and also you have blending modes here. Usually I leave multiply. After you apply drop shadow effect to any of these shapes, you can select next one, appearance, stylize, drop shadow, and you will see the same settings as you applied to previous shape. Click on preview. Now I will show you another tip. Let's change settings for this object, like so. And now you have different settings for this object and for this object. And when we will need to apply shadows for this object, you can create new settings, or you can easily pick settings from this object and from this object. To do this, select object with needed shadow first, click on Applied Drop Shadow Effect, then click on OK or Cancel, that really doesn't matter. Let's click here on Cancel, then select Needed Object, Effects, Stylize, Drop Shadow, and you see values from this object. Now let's click on Cancel, select this object. As you know, we have different values here. Let's click here on Drop Shadow Effect. You can see different values. Cancel, select this object, Effects, Stylize, Drop Shadow, and you have settings from this object. This is a very useful tip. It helps you to save time sometimes and to make your workflow faster. If you learned something new from this tutorial, drop a comment below. Let me know if everything was clear enough for you and what you liked about this video. If you enjoyed this tutorial, support this channel by clicking on subscribe, and what's most important, by clicking on the bell icon to get notifications about newest interesting tutorials from TNT. I would also appreciate if you will click thumbs up and will share this video. This was TNT Tutorials. See you in next videos!